Good morning, everyone, and congratulations on making it through the rain. We've been holding conferences and lecture series here since 2003, and this is in fact our 9th conference. We welcome Shakespeare scholars and enthusiasts of all stripes to our gatherings. Our aim is to provide a forum to encourage research and open discussion of the many issues which have a bearing on the Shakespeare authorship question. A question which remains largely taboo among professional academics, although there are now signs that paradigms may be shifting. I could say that present in this room are 3 people who have been awarded PhDs in subjects which have implications for the authorship question. A 4th person, Robin Williams, a contributor to our conference handout, she passed her viva for her PhD last week, and a 5th person here present has submitted his PhD. And special credit should go to our chairman, Professor Bill Leahy, who has supervised much of this research. Today, Shakespeare, the French Connection, is our theme. How Shakespeare's fictions flirt with truth. We will be exploring how real French personalities, topicalities, and topographies haunt 7 of the plays, comedies and tragedies, as well as histories. In telling these stories and pointing out these correspondences, we will be drawing on some exceptional research carried out in the first half of the 20th century by 2 French scholars, Professor Abel Lefranc and Georges Lombin. Their discoveries have since been developed and endorsed by certain orthodox scholars, like Professor Hugh Richmond of Berkeley, California, as well as by numerous advocates for an alternative author, whether for Bacon, Oxford, Marlowe, Darby, Mary Sidney, or Henry Neville, or. Modern editors of the plays do a great disservice to scholarship in almost entirely ignoring these French connections. This is partly through Anglo-Saxon ignorance and parochialism, I would suggest. Georges Lombin's work, Voyage de Shakespeare en France et en Italie, remains to this day unacknowledged by the mainstream. It only exists in translation as an appendix to a book written by a non-Stratfordian. And yet, up to about 1980, classical Shakespeare scholars like Geoffrey Bullock, in his narrative and dramatic sources of Shakespeare, were at least open to discussing the French connection. But since then, there's been almost total silence in academe. Even in the obvious case of a play like Love's Labour's Lost, where the French context is inescapable, editors of the play devote far more time, 17 pages as opposed to 3, to discussing and disagreeing about the English topicalities they perceive in the play. And the situation has got worse, not better. I'll give just one example. If you compare the 1968 Arden edition of Love's Labour's Lost to the current one, first published 30 years later, you find that the earlier edition, the editor Richard David refers to Abel Lefranc's research 3 times and details a score of correspondences between the play and its French context. Whereas Woodhusen omits many of these, makes no mention at all of Lefranc, and concludes, none of this suggests that Shakespeare was writing an allegorical, a political, or a topical play. This tendency to downplay the French connection does not serve scholarship. It's made worse when academics criticize or condescend to Shakespeare for getting his history or geography wrong, when it is often they themselves who are misinformed. So why this studied silence, the blinkered assumptions, the too easy dismissals? It's not simply a case of ignorance, more of wishing not to know. Shakespeare's fascination with the quirks of certain French personalities, his intimate familiarity with court gossip, the seemingly opaque or throwaway allusions which amount to in-jokes, these are all difficult to square with a Stratford biography. They are an implicit embarrassment. How could he possibly know such things? A recent book by John Pemble, published in 2005, has a promising title. Shakespeare Goes to Paris, How the Bard Conquered France. However, on reading the opening paragraph of his introduction, all such expectations are promptly dashed. There is no evidence that Shakespeare ever went to France, though his imagination often dwelt in its vasty fields and visited the mistress court of mighty Europe. He had a fair knowledge of the French language, but it seems that he reached France as he reached Italy, Sicily, Illyria, Bohemia, Athens, Syracuse, Egypt, and all the other exotic locations in the stories and chronicles that were his stock in trade, via the routes which we are bidden to follow by the chorus in Henry V. He played with his fancies, worked his thoughts, and eked out performance with his mind. I'll leave you to ponder what that means. So we don't wish to overwhelm you with history, but we will need to fill you in with some historical background as we go along. We'll be using slides to introduce all the various characters. Fortunately, we have contemporary portraits of many of them, as well as paintings of some of the most dramatic events happening in France at that time. So, in a nutshell, the French history we are concerned with can be summed up in a series of threes. 3 French royal houses, Bourbon-Navarre, Lorraine, and Valois, led by the 3 Henrys, Henry of Navarre, Henry Duc de Guise, and King Henry III. They correspond to the 3 religious factions which ravaged France with civil wars during the second half of the 16th century. These were the Huguenot Protestants on the one hand, the arch-Catholic Holy Leaguers on the other, and the moderate Catholics caught in between. The pattern was one of ever-shifting allegiances and multiple betrayals. Looming over all these events was the Dowager Queen Catherine de' Medici, whose Machiavellian political manoeuvring and practice of witchcraft earned her the title in both France and England of the Fiendish Queen. We will be meeting her in the guise of Lady Macbeth. 4 of her royal children assumed various roles in 6 of our Shakespeare plays. In the 7th play, Henry V, Catherine de Valois is, of course, her royal ancestor by marriage. Now, we'll introduce ourselves and this sequence of plays briefly now. We have 2 missing seats here, which should be occupied by Derek Jacobi and Richard Clifford. We hope they're on their way through the rain from Rye at this moment. But if I could just ask Emma to start a little introduction.
I shall be talking about Love's Labour's Lost. Now, the plot of Love's Labour's Lost concerns the visit of Catherine de' Medici, her daughter, Marguerite de Valois, to the court of Henry of Navarre in 1578. And she is accompanied by her seductive flying squadron of court ladies who are destined to wreak havoc among the young Protestant lords.
Hamlet. Hamlet and Ophelia's story of thwarted love mirrors a true and tragic tale of a young girl in Marguerite's court who dies for love in 1577. The Queen was so touched and shocked by this event that she recorded it in detail in her memoirs. Phew, sorry about that.
I'm Julia, and I'm talking about All's Well That Ends Well. So this same young girl, Helen de Tournon, appears in a different guise as Helena in All's Well. And the subplot of this play bristles with enigmatic allusions to the Holy Leaguers, the arch-Catholics, led by Scarface, the Duc de Guise. He participated enthusiastically in the slaughter of Protestants on the occasion of the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre in 1572, a horrific event which provided a context for our next play.
Which is Macbeth. I'm Angus. True events surrounding this infamous massacre inform key details in Shakespeare's Scottish tragedy. The effects of guilt on the Macbeths, the sleeplessness, nightmares and hauntings parallel the recorded behaviour of Catherine de' Medici and her second son, Charles IX.
I'm Ros Barber, and I'll be presenting Georges Lombard's work on Measure for Measure, in which we meet her third son, Henry III, unexpectedly in the guise of Duke Vincentio in the play. Contrary to the play's ostensible setting in Vienna, Lombard has argued that key elements of the plot and at least a dozen of the characters have their counterparts in real events and personalities at the French court in 1582.
Thank you. And Mark, perhaps you could be Richard.
I'm Richard Clifford. So there are people who doubt that. And finally, Catherine de' Medici's fourth and youngest son makes a memorable appearance as Bottom in A Midsummer Night's Dream. The Fairy Queen's wooing of Monsieur Bottom is a parody of the marriage negotiations which took place between Queen Elizabeth I and Francois Hercule, the Duc d'Alençon, and were only finally broken off in 1581.
Thank you. And I was at this point going to say that two people who needed no introduction perhaps were Derek. We hope he'll be here. He's going to be acting as our narrator of the sessions on Hamlet and Macbeth. And Mark, who will be playing a variety of roles from... I'm not sure. From Barone to Bottom. So a bit of improvisation may be required. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Emma Jolly. Having been a college lecturer in English literature, Emma is now proud to be an independent scholar. She was awarded a PhD 2 years ago and is the author of a book on the first two quartos of Hamlet, which challenges the widely disseminated hypothesis that the first quarto is a memorial reconstruction. However, her subject for us this morning is Love's Labour's Lost. Please welcome